Welcome back to Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting for Tuesday, February 5. And we are in our regular meeting, our regular session, having resumed, or what's our time? Completing our recess from our executive session. And now we are ready to dive into our afternoon work sessions and business. First up is item 11A, which is a report from our Lane County Planning Commission and their 2018 annual report. With us to introduce our planning commissioners and other people, and the topic is Amber Bell, our senior planner with Lane County Land Management Division. Welcome, Ms. Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Today we will be presenting to you the 2018 annual report of the Lane County Planning Commission. The Lane County Planning Commission serves as a volunteer.
Could you introduce them?
Yes. Joining us is Chair Robert Weeks of the Planning Commission, and he will also be presenting a portion of the report today.
Okay, thanks.
So we appreciate his willingness to attend and co-present today. The Lane County Planning Commission, just to take a step back and repeat myself a little bit, but the Lane County Planning Commission serves as a volunteer advisory committee. They're appointed by the board, and they serve as an advisory committee to the board on land use matters. In addition, the commission functions as the Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee for the county pursuant to Oregon Revised Statute Chapter 197 in all aspects of comprehensive planning. Pursuant to Article 2, Section 4 of the Planning Commission bylaws, a report must be provided to the board after January 1st on an annual basis that documents specific activities of the Planning Commission over the previous calendar year. The Planning Commission is comprised of 9 seats, and in 2018, most of those seats were filled for most of the year. There was a strong attendance record amongst our commissioners. Commissioner Sisson ended his second and final term on September 30th, and we greatly appreciate his service to the county. 2 new commissioners were appointed in 2018. Commissioner Wayne Lemner was appointed on May 1st for his first term, and Commissioner Betsy Schultz was appointed for her first term, I believe December 11th, 2018. All of the planning commissioners spend a significant amount of time reviewing complex land use applications and matters, and we greatly appreciate their time, commitment, and service to the community. Again, Robert Weeks here with us this afternoon, and he'd like to touch on a few highlights from the Planning Commission's activities in 2018. So I'll turn it over to Commissioner Weeks.
Thank you, Amber. Commissioners, the Planning Commission met 19 times between January the 23rd and December the 4th, and at these meetings conducted a total of 11 public hearings and 8 work sessions on other topics. 6 meetings on 3 applicant-requested rural comprehensive plan amendments were reviewed. Amendment to the rural comprehensive plan from residential to agricultural and zone change from rural residential RR10 to exclusive farm use E40. There was an amendment to the rural comprehensive plan from forest to non-resource and zone change from impacted forest land F2 to marginal land. There was an amendment to the rural comprehensive plan from residential to commercial and zone change from rural residential RR5 to rural commercial. One joint meeting was held with the Lane County Parks Advisory Committee regarding the adoption of the Lane County Parks and Open Space Master Plan, Howard Buford Recreational Area, the Habitat Management Plan, and 1994 HBRA Master Plan as special purpose plans of the Rural Comprehensive Plan. 4 meetings regarding planning coordination with the City of Springfield regarding their transportation implementation project were also held, which were very widely attended. 2 meetings regarding planning coordination with the City of Eugene for the following projects: urban reserves and the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan. There were additionally 5 meetings regarding the Lane Code Modernization Project, including amendments to Lane Code Chapter 13, Land Divisions, and Lane Code Chapter 16, Resource Zones. I'm also pleased to report that there were a number of training offered to the Lane County Planning Commission on topics such as the Planning Commission roles and responsibilities, the planning legal processes and department functions, and training was given on the quite hot topic of Oregon water law and plan amendment review. I have to report at the end of the year, I feel the Commission has fulfilled their functions. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you very much. Very impressive. Any questions by commissioners, comments about the work of the Lane County Planning Commission? I will ask you this. We have had in various times in the past people say, well, the job of the Planning Commission is so overwhelming and there's so much to do and all these requirements to review the public records and hear testimony and make decisions, that the outreach function or the community involvement function of Goal 1 of our land use, state land use law is difficult for this group of people that are typically confined to the record that they have to decide, but they're also supposed to be the outreach. So the very people that are doing all this intense work, that have all these demands on them, are also supposed to increase public involvement, somewhat tough task. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what, number one, you've done about public involvement and improving the public involvement component of your current responsibilities, and secondly, what your view would be on, separating those responsibilities and having somebody else do the public involvement with government decision making.
Well, thank you for asking the question. It's one we've discussed amongst ourselves, and we do recognize that that is part of our function. Actually, in the last year, we've introduced a session at the beginning where the public can come and talk to us on any subject that they wish, in order to try and improve the contact with the public that we do have. You're quite right, there is an enormous amount of stuff that has to be read, and I do feel that the commissioners do a fantastic job in going through all of that, and the breadth of the questions shows just how much they do actually take that in. All of the letters that the public send and are attached to each file get carefully reduced and considered by the commissioners at each meeting. And a number of commissioners on an individual basis have been out to various meetings to engage with the public and to try and understand things. And it is also each commissioner's responsibility to actually make people in their community aware of where they are. I do feel more could be done. I don't believe we've got there yet. I think that there is room for improvement, but if you separate the two functions, perhaps you're back to square one because you're not actually getting the sense that people are engaged with the people that are reviewing all the files and things like that. So my feeling is it's a good system. I do think it needs to be improved. I don't quite know how just yet. We're still working on that one.
Are there models of other communities, in my communities, I guess, by jurisdictions, governments that are under Oregon's land use law, where they are doing something different from ours? You described what I would say is a great process of receiving public comment and certainly being willing to accept what the public brings in, where maybe a more robust interpretation of Goal 1 is to involve the public, not just to receive information from the public. So I wonder, since there are 200 and something cities and 35 other counties that have to follow all these involvement rules, are there any, bright lights out there that look interesting to you? Are there any where people are doing it differently than we are and perhaps achieving this nebulous concept of involvement of the public?
Well, I think you've actually asked a very good question, and I don't think I'm in a position to be able to tell you what all 200 are doing, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks a lot, and I'm sure we'll have some questions for you, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. Mr. Wigg, wow, what a robust agenda you just outlined. You guys did a lot this year. I remember when I was a Eugene City Councilor, or Planning Commission, I would always look at their workload. I'd think, boy, I'm glad I don't have that workload. Because it really is pretty robust and it's pretty broad. And you know, the ever-changing role of participation, Oregon's Planning Goal 1 requires a Citizen Involvement Committee. We all know that. And we all know that it's to involve give the public an opportunity to become involved in the land use process. Some jurisdictions have a separate Citizen Involvement Committee. Most jurisdictions consider the Planning Commission as the Citizen Involvement Committee. By way of your regular work, typically, this is that you provide opportunity for citizen involvement. And by that, you actually do meet Planning Goal 1's requirements, as far as I can see. Now, sometimes, like when I was with the City of Eugene, we had a separate Citizen Involvement Committee which really reached out to really all phases of citizen involvement, like beyond land use, you know. On most ordinances, we ran it through the Citizen Involvement Committee. They did away with that eventually, and fell back on the fact that Goal 1 requires a citizen. The only requirement for the citizen involvement is Goal 1, and it's in all phases of planning. And I think you guys do that, and it's interesting. And I would encourage that you look for greater ways for public involvement. But as far as I can see, the natural role of the Planning Commission, as it's been used, does fulfill the Goal 1 requirement of the law. So I'm excited to see what the further discussions that you may have at the Planning Commission level as to how to further involve the public in citizen involvement. And it's going to be interesting to see how that happens. But I don't think I can point out to any deficiency that has
I do take on board what Commissioner Sorensen said, though. I think that's actually a very good point, because I'm not really very aware of any interaction and connection with a lot of the other planning commissions to find out just what they are doing. Yeah. So perhaps that's something for me to talk about with staff and see what we can do about that.
And you can talk to Commissioner Ledick, who spent time on the City of Eugene's Planning Commission, to discuss how the City of Eugene handles the citizen involvement component that's required in Oregon's land use planning. But beyond that, your work is intrepid. I mean, the amount of work that you do is just intriguing at how much work you attend to. And I'm glad that you're on the job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Phil.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Okay, Commissioner Buck.
I'd just like to acknowledge again all your hard work and all the dedicated time that you volunteer to do on this particular board. It seems to me that some boards don't have as much of a workload as others, and this is one of those that really does have a huge workload, and you dedicate a lot of time to it, and I personally appreciate that very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Bush. On behalf of the entire Lane County Planning Commission, it is a team, and all of us contribute a part. We do have some very able members on our staff, so I'm very happy to achieve what we have done.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the report and appreciate all your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
We're now going to call up Ms. Kepler, and this is item 11B, Order 19-2-05-09, in the matter of approving the jurisdictional transfer territorial highway, Oregon Route 200, from Oregon Department of Transportation to Lane County, and granting authority to the county administrator to execute the jurisdictional transfer agreement. And Ms. Kepler, you can introduce your colleague there and then give us the review of this.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I'd like to introduce Sasha Vartanian. She is our new Transportation Supervisor, and will be here presenting a number of issues over the coming years. So today we just thought we'd give you an opportunity to answer any questions that you might have regarding the jurisdictional transfer of territorial highway. This is one of 3 roads that were identified in the House Bill 2017 that ODOT was to have discussions with Lane County. We approved and have completed the transfer of the Highway 222, which is the Springfield-Cresswell Highway between Jasper and Cresswell last fall, and we now are ready to complete this for Territorial Highway, and if approved today, then it will go to the Oregon Transportation Commission next month. So if you have
Okay.
any questions.
Okay, great. And this has been a long time in coming, and we have been working with our colleagues in the legislature on this, and it looks like this is getting close to being done. I did have a question about the length of this. It's from the Benton County line all the way to the Douglas County line, and does it include all of it? I thought I saw an email about, in the Cresswell area, that it didn't apply in that area.
On the
Does.
Territorial Highway, it is the entire length. We are actually accepting the maintenance part of it over the phased distribution of the funding. So we will have ownership of it, but we actually won't have to maintain the entire section at this time. So we'll start with the southern portion now, and in 2022, we will take the northern section north of Veneta, and then we will take the final section in 2024 between Veneta, Highway 126, and Gillespie Corners.
Okay, wonderful. Other questions, comments? Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you for that clarification, because I was having a little bit of trouble following some of the maps back and forth on I knew we were talking about transfer the entire roadway, but the progression of the maintenance responsibility. One of the things this was tied to in House Bill 2017, one of the aspects that won approval from some of the legislatures was this aspect of some of these jurisdictional transfers in both directions. So my question was, as part of our, this whole idea of us taking on territorial was the state taking on Delta Highway. Where is that in this process? And are we going to put ourselves in a position where we've taken on all the state roads they wanted us to take on, which is Oregon 222, or I think it is, what's the?
It's 222
and 200.
200, yeah.
This one's 200.
Yeah, yes, but 222 and the Springfield Cresswell one, which I think I know it by another name, Jasper.
Parkway and
Yeah,
also
yeah.
a Cloverdale.
Yeah, Cloverdale, yeah.
And that is later in your agenda where we actually establish the county road numbers with those.
Yeah, yeah. So, but we're taking on the state highways they wanted us to take on. Are we going to be left, with all these state highways and they're not going to do Delta? Where's the comparable land slot? Where are we with Delta?
We are almost completed with our negotiations on the Delta Highway. We anticipate the final draft will be out in the next month, and it will probably be to the board in April with that one.
Okay.
We were having some conversations about the extent of the right-of-way. There were some portions of properties that were purchased to construct the Delta Highway, but actually weren't included in the travel way, and they really didn't fit our needs for maintenance. So we have had some negotiations on that, and we've come to some conclusions on that. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Commissioner Farr?
Just a kind of a general comment about the Territorial Highway. It really is one of our main tourist routes, and it's used extensively by multimodal transportation. And that's one thing that's exciting about us taking it over, is that I think we probably have a greater and keener awareness and devotion to multimodal transportation, particularly bicycles. And as we know, Delta Highway has some pretty frightening little stretches right now that I'm excited about what we're going to do in the future to straighten that out and to really make it a pathway, north-south pathway for bicycle riders. My sister works for Travel Oregon, and she talks about the really hot spots in Oregon that European visitors come. And then she says that European visitors like to stay in Eugene in no small part because of our access to the easy, quick access, more than Portland, for instance, to the countryside, where they can really see and experience what the Oregon countryside looks like. So I'm really pretty excited about it. And Sasha, I'm no longer on the MPC, and neither are you, so I get to see you again in this role. So thank you very much. Good to see you.
Okay, so is there a motion to approve the order?
So moved. Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Burney, seconded by Commissioner Bozovich to approve Order 19-02-0509. Further discussion?
So I just want to say this is really kind of the culmination of a long, long effort, and including, trying to obtain federal funding and getting state funding lined up for this. That all started with a tragic accident. And I don't want to forget that in some ways. I wasn't close to Jane, although I have a lot of friends that were on that ride with her. And it happened in front of a friend of mine's house when they were out of town, and another friend of mine was their house sitter, was the first responder. It was a horrible accident. Hopefully we'll avoid that if we get these improvements done. And this is our taking over the jurisdiction starts the improvements and the clock ticking for the state funding to get that area of, south of Gillespie Corners down to Lorraine Highway straightened out a little bit, maybe widen some shoulders and make it safe for the multimodal transportation that uses that, from the need to access our federal forest and private forests that are down there, to the need for the traveling public to get to the wineries and the tourism that's down there, to the cycling community that's a favorite road of. So I really appreciate this work and this kind of last bureaucratic step in the process leading ultimately to those improvements.
Yeah, thank you very much for mentioning that. I was going to mention that this is a perfect example of why our Metro commissioners, the Eugene and Springfield commissioners, need to be engaged in these transportation issues, because these visitors that are going out there on Territorial Highway, often they live in Eugene and Springfield. And this tragedy that was alluded to, and I'm sure there's plenty of other tragedies, but this one tragedy was so big that it really did kick off this whole discussion of, well, why does ODOT not maintain this road to certain standards? Answer: it is not considered that important from a state perspective. And so, here we are responding to this kind of problem, and it's very important to our tourist economy to make sure that we have the connections here that are safer, not completely safe. I don't think we'll ever be able to guarantee safety, but we can certainly reduce the kind of tragedies that brought us to this. So any further comments before we go to a vote? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those please opposed, please say no. The vote is 5-0, and the order is adopted. Thank you so much to both of you and other staff that helped in getting this all ready. Okay, next up is item 11C. This is the report on land use appeal trends. This was, I believe, a main response to a request that I made about bringing back the costs for filing certain appeals. Last year, the board approved an order increasing the fees, and now Mr. Miller, Keir Miller, interim land management division manager, is here to give us this report. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Sorensen. Good afternoon, Commissioners. As you mentioned, on January 8th of this year, the board directed staff to report back on the status of appeal trends, specifically the elect not to hear appeal process, since the fees for that process were raised by the board back on July 10th of 2018. And that information is pretty straightforward, and I'll go over that in just a minute. We have 6 months of appeal data prior to the fees being increased and 6 months of appeal data afterwards. What is not especially straightforward is the land use appeal process and how this one component of the appeal process fits in. So I want to give the board just a little bit of perspective and background on what we're talking about today and a little historical background on the fees involved with these types of applications. So on the screen before you is it's the land use process, specifically as it involves opportunities for appeal, and I just want to talk you through it real quick. So starting at the bottom, and these things get elevated up as they go, we have an application being submitted. This is a land use application, could be for a dwelling or a hardship dwelling, something like that. There are generally arguments in favor presented by the applicant and arguments in opposition presented by those opposed. The planning director evaluates that arguments and makes a decision. So that's the initial decision. After that, whoever the loser is, they can request that the planning director either appeal, or they can request that the planning director reconsider the decision and simultaneously request an appeal if the director chooses not to reconsider. That then goes to the Lane County hearings official. In Lane County, we're lucky to have two really experienced land use attorneys who serve as our hearings officials. Gary Darneal is the primary hearings official for the county. He's been in that role since 1983. He's got a lot of experience with the Rural Comprehensive Plan and Lane Code. The other hearings official is Ann Davies, who I believe the board, most of you know. She's also a consultant for the Land Management Division on contract to do some planning work. She's a former Land Use Board of Appeals referee and has a lot of experience evaluating land use decisions as well. So generally, the first appeal will go to the hearings official, and they'll make a determination. Depending on the outcome of that, an appellant or the applicant, if the application is denied, they can then elevate and make an additional appeal. And the way that process works is it would go to the Board of Commissioners. That's interesting. It goes to the Board of Commissioners to determine whether or not they want to take up that appeal. There's a chance to provide comments when an application is submitted or to make your argument when you submit an application. Then there's an opportunity to appeal to the hearings official. And then there's a third opportunity to request the board either hear the matter or request that the board move it on to the Land Use Board of Appeals. So we're at this point right here, and historically, excuse me, there was the fees for this process, for the first process, are set in statute. So for the initial appeal, a local jurisdiction can only charge $250, and that's to ensure that individuals aren't priced out of making an initial appeal on a land use decision, that they have that opportunity and it's not excessively cost prohibitive. After that $250 initial appeal, there is no requirements for what the fees are to be set. In the Land Management Division, as the board is aware, we're a fee-supported. We work on an enterprise funding model, and we generally try to recoup fees or recoup our costs through fees. So prior to 2008, there was a $2,200 appeal application for an appeal to the Board of Commissioners. If the board elected to hear that appeal, that we would keep the entire $2,200. If the board chose to just pass that appeal through to the Land Use Board of Appeals, half of that amount was refunded. So the elect not to hear appeal fee was $1,100. In 2008, the board lowered that fee down to $250, so it was the same amount as the initial appeal. And so that's what we're discussing today. In July of this year, as I mentioned, the board raised that fee up to $950. And that was, that figure, $950, gets us closer to recouping costs on the work involved with reviewing the appeal, the elect not to hear appeal packet, developing the packet, legal counsel review at the Board of Commissioners, and the administrative overheads and everything that are associated with just bringing a packet to the board. So that's what that $950 fee covers. So at this time now, I've got some information on what has occurred with appeals since that was increased 6 months ago, and I'll just walk through that real quick. Sure.
I just want to point out, I'd like to get Mr. Miller through his presentation, and we'll open it up to questions. Go ahead.
Thank you. So in the 6 months prior to the fee increase, July 2010, we had an average of 2 elect not to hear appeals come before the board each month. In the 6 months after that, it dropped significantly. There was only 4 elect not to hear requests that came to the board. So there was a reduction in the number of elect not to hear appeals before the board. But what I do want to point out is the overall appeals that the division received were also down by about 25%. So in other words, the universe of appeals that could have gotten to the board was reduced. That being said, there's still likely some correlation between the fee increase and the reduction in fees, but it's hard to say for certain. Another thing that plays into how many elect not to hear appeals we have are just the types of appeals that come before us, how contentious they are. 6 months of data in the bigger picture isn't a lot of data to really make a clear case one way or another. So this is just a graphic representation of the same. The gray lines indicate the total number of appeals, and then the blue is the elect not to hear process. So again, we just wanted to present this data. Staff isn't advocating one way or another. We recognize and appreciate the role that appeals play in the land use process. There's pros and cons. I just want to point out some of those real quickly. The obvious advantage to having a lower appeal at that third bite of the apple is that it lowers the financial barrier for folks who want to challenge a land use decision, and that eventual challenge or an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals may result in a different, I can't say better, it depends on your perspective if you're the applicant or appellant, different decision, and may result in a more nuanced decision. So that's the main benefit of the lower cost. The disadvantages are that it increases the overall costs of the application process. It can create delays in the application process and uncertainty for certain types of land use decisions. I will point out that the primary decisions that are appealed and that then go up to LUBA generally are appeals for either template dwellings. We've also seen some for hardship dwellings, so it's generally going to increase costs and delays for those types of applications. The other implication is for the Land Management Division budget. We're in budget season right now, so this is kind of top of my mind. I do have to factor in the fact that these lower fees do have an impact on the division's budget. Another significant disadvantage of the high number of appeals, and this isn't directly correlated to the fees, but it could be to some extent, is that it really drags on the overall work of the division, our day-to-day work of processing land use applications. We've had a record number of appeals the last couple of years. We had 45 appeals this last year. That well outpaces any other county in Oregon except for Deschutes County, where they have a similar amount of development pressure that we have. And finally, a lower appeal cost may result in more frivolous appeals, or at least having a higher cost certainly makes appellants think harder about the case and whether it's a strong case. So again, I just want to point out no advocacy one way or another. I just want the board to be aware of those pros and cons, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Commissioner Burney.
Forgive me, this is just, if you went back to the chart that showed each step of the process. Thank you very much. Would you mind tracing through the costs as you keep going up?
Sure. So there's an initial cost for the applicant when they submit a land use decision. That's, depending on the type of application they're requesting, there's a cost there. That decision, director level decision, can be appealed to the county hearings official, and that's a $250 fee that's set in statute. After that, the appellant can request that the board not hear the appeal and push the decision directly to the Land Use Board of Appeals. The current fee for that is $950. If they don't wish to do that and they want the board to hear the appeal costs are around $2,000 for that because it takes into account the board process, the hearings process. After that, it gets to the Land Use Board of Appeals, and it's outside of the county's jurisdiction, and there are other fees beyond that. It can go to the Court of Appeals and then ultimately to the Oregon Supreme Court.
But you don't know the, okay.
I apologize. I don't know the exact cost for each of those processes. I'd be happy to find that out.
Question here. I actually had to go back last night and look through the meeting last summer that you had about this to get myself up to speed. And the main question I have is, why are the requests not to hear coming to the board? It seems like if they don't want us to hear, it should just go up and so it's just an open question. Why are we doing that? And there was, I believe in the meeting, a discussion about maybe not doing that, and wanted to hear more from the chair and the other commissioners about that particular process.
Sure, I can give an initial response. It's a great question. When the county makes a decision on, I'm sorry, let me back up. The hearings official decision is not officially the final decision of the county. He's a neutral party. The county then must make a final land use decision, and that can either be through the board elect not to hear process where they ratify the decision of the hearings official, or they can hold a hearing on it. In doing that, in hearing that matter, the board retains deference on the interpretation of our own code, of lane code. So there is some deference given once the appeal gets to the Land Use Board of Appeals. So there is a benefit to the board in that regard.
I'll just mention that it's really up to the county as to how it wants to structure a final local decision. We could say at the director level, the director makes a decision, the director's the final decider, and that's the end. We don't do that. We create a much bigger set of options for people. I might say that if we appointed, or if the hearings official decision was not advisory, but in fact was the final decision, then we would have a two-step process of the director decision and then a final decision by hearings official. And if people didn't like that, they could appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. So we've created a multi-step process that isn't required. What we're required to do is to have a final county decision. And so some of what's going on here is we've got all these different levels when we could just say, you know, and this is going to be a big number I'll just throw out, but 90% of all the cases are approving the director decision. And so we're talking about just cases on the margin where board activity or hearing official activity is pretty minor in the whole thing, and it takes a lot of time, and of course it takes the lawyers and all this. And hey, I'm not opposed to lawyers making money, but if we said, okay, if you have a problem with this decision, you can appeal it to the Land Use Board of Appeals. That's one way to really significantly cut back on the expenses of all parties involved, is just say, the board doesn't need to hear all this. I mean, most of the time, the director decision is correct, and if someone doesn't like the director decision, then they can appeal to a hearings official. If they don't like the hearings official decision, they can go to LUBA. I mean, and to me, that reduces a lot. Now, today on our board, on our agenda, Commissioner, you'll see that we did have on our consent calendar 2 items where we took the final action by approving the board order that was in the packet. So that is another step, even in cases where we approve the decision, we still have to take the final local decision because, as Mr. Miller points out, the land use law does require us to have a final local decision. And under our code currently, could be changed, but under our code currently, the commissioners can get involved if they want to. My own opinion, long held, is that we'd be better off spending our time on what our code should say and spending our time making a code. That's what we really are, is ordinance makers. We're not really judges. We're not really administrative law judges. And our main responsibility, in my view, is to get our code up to date, make sure our code is what reflects the values of our community, rather than spending the extraordinary amount of time that we spend on land use decision-making. As to the other thing you pointed out, which was that the appeal from the director decision to the hearings official, that fee was substantial throughout the state. That fee was being used to block people from appealing decisions within their county or city, and the state legislature had to step in and put a statutory a maximum on that fee, and that's happened within the last 6 years, I would say, 10 years. I'm looking kind of generally over here.
Might be a little longer than that, but.
Longer than that? Okay, 12 years. So I just feel like that became a big issue because certain communities were trying to block people. I don't recall if Lane County was one of them. What was our fee before the 250?
2,200. Oh,
No, it wasn't that
For the
high.
initial hearing, I couldn't say. I think it predates my time in the
Okay,
county.
it wasn't that big, but it was reduced by virtue of the state statute that our Representative Barnhart played a big role in getting it reduced. So anyway, Commissioner Farr, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
yeah, and Commissioner Sorensen, thank you. That's about as clear an explanation as I've heard at this level or at any other level regarding this process. But I do have a question on that. You have the outline of our process right there, and it sounds that Commissioner Sorensen is suggesting that no other county has such a structure. Is that correct?
I don't know if that's what Commissioner Sorensen was suggesting, and I don't believe that that's the case. I think other jurisdictions do have a process where I know for a fact where a local elected body can play a role in the appeals process.
I thought I heard you say that we made this up, so maybe I misheard that. And I agree with working on our code, making it reflect the community values. But no matter how much we have the code reflect community values, somebody's going to disagree with our interpretation of what the community values are, and there'll be appeals, as we've experienced. But my question is, it was in July of last year, we moved from 250 to 950. And
Correct.
you said that brought us closer. Let's see, my quote here is, it brings us closer to recouping the costs. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So the fee that was in place prior to 2008 of $1,100 for a board elect not to hear, that went through and was a result of a fee study analysis that the county contracted for. And in $2,008, that was about the amount it took to process one of those elect not to hear. So a decade later, we're $200 less than in 2018 dollars.
Yeah, okay, so that gives me a rough equivalent of what it might cost then. Got to do a bit of math, but there's not much math involved there. So the 250 was that much further away from recouping costs, $700 per application. And did I understand that since the fees went up, in addition to the 950 being closer to recouping costs than 250, we've also had a smaller number of claims, of appeals, which multiplies that by however many number of appeals it's been reduced. Now, I'm not in favor of reducing appeals, but it sounds as though that there's a kind of a double impact there. We're closer to recouping the cost, plus there are less appeals. Each one is a loss. So
Each one is certainly a loss because the initial hearing process, we're taking a hit right there with the $250 appeal. We pay for the services of the hearings official, and that's pretty expensive. So,
and we pay for staff to sit in this room and to prepare.
and the land management division is billed for your time. So, yeah.
And needless to say, there are certain things that government does that we don't get our costs recouped, and it's relatively new that we try to recoup costs. I don't know, it's not gone back more than 20 years, I don't think.
It started in 2002.
2002. Okay. All right. Then the other question that I have is regarding the pressure to develop. You said that Deschutes County is the only other county that has the same kind of pressure that we have to develop. Did I hear you say that right?
I may have said something along those lines. So Deschutes County, obviously, they're the fastest growing county in Oregon around Bend. They have a high level of development pressure, so they see a lot of land use appeals as well. In Lane County, we have, it's just based on our geography, and also we have a pretty high population base here, but we also have more acres of rural residential land than any other county, so we have the opportunity for more development here as well.
Understood. Okay, that clarifies that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I was wondering what you thought of, going back to the chart, what you thought of my idea of scaling back the number of appeals within the county and maybe having just a director decision and an appeal to a hearings official, and that would constitute the final action on the part of the county. Wouldn't that substantially reduce your budget problems? Because then the preparation of the record for the pros and cons to be given to the director, that would all be staff work, and then an appeal to the hearing official, that would be staff work, and that would then be the end of the county's work, because then you would have had a final county decision. Wouldn't that substantially solve your budget problem? Because just looking at it from a budget standpoint, and then what do you think of doing it as a matter of policy?
So it would eliminate an entire layer of this appeals process, and that would obviously have some result in less work for staff, less time before the Board of Commissioners. The one drawback to that, as I alluded to before, is the board would, if we adopted the hearings official decision as a local county decision, I'm going to look to Andy here, I believe we would lose deference in that matter. And
Why would we lose deference? He or she would be making a decision on behalf of the county.
that, we'll ask Andy for that.
You'll recall, I think we had part of this discussion back when the board was contemplating the Chapter 14 amendments. But what Keir says is right, that the concept of deference, and hopefully I can state it correctly, is essentially where the appeal body, in this case LUBA, Court of Appeals, Supreme Court, will defer to a local decision, provided that it's, I think, reasonable, but also if it's something that the locals, if it's within their purview to decide on. In other words, the board's interpretation of county-adopted code, county-adopted policy is entitled to deference. The county code that reflects statutory requirements, you're not entitled to deference. That's statutory law, even though it's codified in our code. And so there are limits to deference. But the other rule as to whether or not this county board would be deferred to by LUBA is if it is the board in its quasi-judicial judging role is interpreting the same code, interpreting the code it's applying. So in other words, because this board is a legislative body that adopted the code language, if it then later is interpreting the code language, courts will defer to that interpretation because it was the legislative adopting body. That doesn't apply to a hearings official determination because the hearings official didn't adopt the legislation to begin with. So that's how that works.
We'll finish our first round by calling on Commissioner Bozovich and then Commissioner Buck.
So, and that's my understanding. I appreciate Andy coming forward. The hearings official decision being final, we can't delegate that local interpretation to the hearings official. We have to do it as a legislative body to get the deference, is what he was trying to say. And there's another issue in the background. We have at least a letter of advice from the Attorney General's office to the State Building Codes office talking about third-party delegation of discretionary authority about building code officials. which caused quite a stir last year, and we've gotten held off, but they have not completed that issue. We contract for our hearings officials. There's going to be some concern that if that letter of advice becomes an actual opinion of the Attorney General, that we may not be able to any longer contract hearings officials out. And that delegation of that discretionary authority is an issue. So without us affirming the hearings official's decision, that becomes a constitutional issue of whether we've illegally delegated that authority. So whether we're going to do elect not to hear and just affirm that way, or we're going to actually rehear the hearings official decision, that may be necessary anyway in the legal side of things. So that's kind of about the, one, the deference issue, and whether we even have the legal authority to delegate that final decision down to the hearings official is questionable. I have a couple quick questions. Do we need to have the first level appeal be local? Is that statutory requirement?
Yes, it is.
So that I want to make sure that people understand that. We can't just have a director's decision and then let the next appeal go to LUBA. We have to have a local appeal process. So, and that's the one the $250 fee is attached to. So
Don't we have that, though, to the hearings official? That's the $250 limit.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have to have some kind of local appeal of the director. We can't skip that next step. Now, because of that, we've chosen to use hearings officials rather than having that next step be an appeal to the Board of Commissioners. If the only place we can eliminate a step out of this is to pull the hearings official out and have us hear everything. Because we still have to go through either elect to hear or elect not to hear, because that's about the deference and delegation of the final decision. So, we're kind of built into state law and some of these other issues is either we go through this process here and we have the basically first step of appeal to the hearings official. Second step is to the board either elect to hear or to hear the hearings official's appeal. And then it goes up to the state level and beyond past that. Unless we're either going to give up our deference and our final authority, which I don't think this board wants to do that. I'm just making an assumption there. And there's still a question of whether we constitutionally can delegate that authority. We're kind of stuck unless we want to skip the hearings official and all appeals come to us. There were 45 appeals last year. Think about time management a little bit. So, and this is the process for type 1 applications.
Type 2.
Type 2, type 2, sorry. There are other applications that don't go through this process, that we've seen quite a few of where we actually hold a hearing and the Planning Commission holds a hearing, and that has a whole different appeal process to it and all that. But basically, arguments in opposition are free. You guys don't charge for folks to submit testimony in the first phase, right?
Correct.
So somebody that might be against a decision that you make approving an applicant's submittal can submit all the testimony they want for free. They can make that first appeal to the hearings official for $250. So at that point, somebody that's against a land use decision might have $250 and some time invested. Then the next step is $950, which, when we initially put in the $1,100, it was way before 2008, actually. But even in 2008 dollars, that's $1,282 today. Just brought up my inflation calculator online. So we're still well below what it probably is costing us according to a cost study. So, at that point, somebody has $1,200, as they're trying to get to their second, as you said, third bite at the apple, but second appeal, to get up to the, past us and on to LUBA. I don't see that as an unreasonable barrier, and we did have an elect to hear last week in January, so there's one for January, 2 already for February, and we just started the month. If you look at that chart, they started ramping up towards the end. Like there was a little bit of a lag, and then now it doesn't seem to be much of a barrier. like one in November and two in December. We had one in January, and we've already had two in February. So if that chart were 2 more months, you're starting to see them pick back up. So I feel that, the level of the fee seems to have been not excessive and not a barrier at this point. And the process is what we need by law unless we want to start hearing decisions ourselves.
Go ahead.
I appreciate everybody's comments because I still don't feel like I still feel like what you said, Chair, makes more sense logistically speaking. I understand what Commissioner Bozovich is saying, and if I understand this right, because the hearings official level is not a county employee, that's the crux of that issue?
No. Let me react a little bit to that and to Commissioner Bozovich's comments as well. The hearings official is a contracted employee. His decisions, his or her, I guess we have, Ann does some as well, become the final county decisions unless they're appealed, okay? It's only if they're appealed and someone wants to go up to LUBA that they have to appeal it to this board, who then issues the final county decision. But if it's not appealed, the hearings official decision becomes the final county decision. Does that make sense? There's a lot of counties that do that in the state. When we were kicking around the changes to Chapter 14, I kind of shot an email around to the other county attorneys just to kind of take a poll of who does what, and it's kind of split. And really the question for me was, how important is deference to your county? A lot of the bigger counties said it's not an issue for us. That is, they give up the right to have the board make the final decision. The hearings official did it.
That leads to my second half of my question.
The discretion, the deference issue really is that the county board, it is assumed that the county board knows what it intended when it adopted legislation, and therefore its interpretation of that legislation in the adjudicative function is given some deference, because they assume you folks knew what you meant when you adopted the legislation, therefore you can apply it more accurately, and that's kind of the concept of deference.
And in that particular concept, I mean, those policies that were enacted, or that language that was enacted at the time, was not me. And it will change as different commissioners are on the board over the years. So we're up here now trying to think back to what they meant back then when, that may not be what I personally would think is right. So that's where I'm not sure that is a best argument for me at the moment.
I'm just telling you what it is conceptually.
Right, no, I appreciate that.
Whether it makes sense, you're right. There is that somewhat of logical inconsistency in how that's applied, because the board changes boards, as you know. So.
Just to be clear, my question about could the hearings official be the final county decision? You said that is done in some counties.
Yes, in a lot of counties. And I haven't really heard the argument that Commissioner Bozovich made with respect to the delegative function, that is whether this board can delegate that authority to a lower body like a hearings official. There's a number of counties that do that. I worked at Clackamas County, and that's the way they have processed them for years and years.
Commissioner Berning.
To add to Heather's lack of clarity, I will add my own lack of clarity. I don't know the details of what Commissioner Bozovich, I don't, what he articulated, and I'm hearing you say that many counties choose to. So I'm just going to weigh in and share that what Chair Sorensen said as I was listening, that would mean there would be still 5 opportunities to appeal if we eliminated the request for board not to hear or the request for board to hear. There would still be submitted director decision, appeal, hearings official decision, potentially appeal to LUBA, et cetera. I'm just following the chart. Is that correct?
There are 3, there were, under that scenario, without this board hearing, there would be really 3 rights to appeal. That is, an appeal to the hearings official, an appeal to LUBA, and an appeal to the Court of Appeals.
Okay.
As of right, you can appeal to the Supreme Court, but they don't have to take your appeal. So
thank you. No, so there are opportunities for appeal. I must say that this seems very inefficient, and I must say that what Chair Sorensen articulated, I would rather spend time looking at ordinances that reflect the community as opposed to hearings where, honestly, I'm at a bit of a loss. So that makes sense to me, and I know I'm not completely informed as to process.
Okay, and let's just keep going with people that want to be recognized. Commissioner Bozovic.
Thank you. So I want to explain why the deference to the local legislative body is important a little bit. Where that's important is where we have standards that go beyond statute. And one of the places that we just had a long discussion about was citing standards. And that, when we talked about citing a dwelling in, F2 and marginal lands and a few other cases, those citing standards are really important. And one of the things we're talking about doing is bringing them back to upgrade them for fire. There's no statutory requirement to do that. We've already met the statutes and have been acknowledged by the state as meeting the statutes. If we go beyond that, it's a local bit of code that we're going to write. As that gets interpreted in an appeals process, if we don't, as the legislative body, adopt whatever decision's made as final, deference to our interpretation if we agree with the interpretation that is of those codes that we adopted above and beyond state code won't be given. So LUBA could basically say, oh, you guys just didn't know what you were doing when you were adding all those fire restrictions and slope conditions, et cetera. And we, and it could be a case where we denied a dwelling on a site in the location that the applicant wanted, and the hearings official, upheld the decision of the director, and it's the applicant doing the appeal, and they get to LUBA, and the applicant makes an argument that our interpretation of those fire standards wasn't correct, and he should be allowed to have the dwelling, and our local interpretation of that doesn't count or doesn't get deference. That's where that nuance is when we want to do something above and beyond in our code, above and beyond statute. And that's, maybe the most recent example of where we've talked about pieces of our code that are beyond statute.
I wanted to ask a question of you, Keir. I know the Land Management Division receives money in at least two big piles. One is called the fees, and the other is called the Waste Management Fund. What, and there might be a third big category that I'm not currently aware of, but what is the current dollar amounts on the fees versus the waste management money?
So we actually are pretty diversified here, but this is the most I think we've seen in diversity in our budget. We get a portion of video lottery dollars, funds about one FT, $100,000 approximately. We do get a portion of federal Title III money, which funds our Firewise program. And then the majority of our revenue comes from fees, and that's upwards of $4 million or so. And then the remainder of the budget, which I believe is about $1.3 million, is from Waste Management Division tipping fees. It may be a little different, but that's pretty close.
So if you received a slight increase in your waste management fee money, it would more than make up for any change we might make in rolling back or reducing the fees for these appeals.
I assume it would, yeah. I mean, we see.
How much will you lose if we roll it back from $950 to $250?
Well, I would think that's 45 times, what is that? 500, 700, yeah.
Okay, and
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
I just wanted to share, as part of your sort of deliberation on this issue, it's important to, I think, consider that there's a domino effect anytime we start shifting revenue. The Public Works Director and I have had more recent conversations about actually reconsidering the amount of the tipping fee that is transferred to land management, because that was done at a point in time in which the economy looked much different than it did today. So I just, if we're going to have a conversation about, or there's a desire on the board to increase revenue, I'd like to put all of those things on the table for us to explore.
Well, I'm just trying to get this idea, we'll put this all in perspective. You get $1.3 million from Waste Management, and the difference between the 250 and the 950 would cost you $24,500 in 1 year. And I'm just saying, if we could get you $24,500 from Waste Management, assuming that that would not change the overall picture of a fund that's got several thousand times that much money in it, that would solve the problem. And it would address could you go back to the other slide right before the bar graph slide? Yeah. That would also address the fact that the number went from 12 to 4. That's a pretty significant drop from 12 to 4. So if it's not that big of a deal, why don't we just not have a barrier, that barrier which apparently is shown to exist? Anyway, I know Commissioner Burney has to be,
No, I'm
okay. Commissioner Farr, you were next on my list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just have a couple of questions. I'm in favor of streamlining the process also. I think it sounds that you have kind of universal interest in that. One of the reasons that I'm in favor of it is not the money part of it, which clearly there is money involved. There are costs involved. To me, time is really the most important element here. And anytime we slow down the process, the ultimate result is that whatever the project is delayed by that length of time. And sometimes that can be a long, long time in my experience. So my other question then is on the number of appeals, the initial appeals, my assumption, my presumption is that most of those are regarding residential. Is that a good assumption, or am I a little bit off on that?
Most of them are regarding single-family dwellings on, not on residential land, but on resource zone land.
But it has to do with adding front doors, adding bedrooms,
That's
adding
correct.
places for people to sleep at night.
Yeah.
So most of the appeals are regarding housing. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
If I could also just add on to your comments about time, I think that's a really good point. The other piece is the overall drag on the division and its ability to get other permits out in a timely manner. So eliminating a whole level of the appeal process would certainly streamline that.
So money, we can always get more money, right? You can print it. But time, you can't get more time. Once it's gone, it's gone. That's the one thing that we don't have an abundance of, and we can't regenerate as the time, whether it be staff time, or whether it be time for the guy to start pounding nails to build a home for his family or their caretaker, whatever it may be. So to me, once again, I've been involved in lumber and building materials for a long, long time, and I hear all the time that the biggest enemy of building a house is time, is lost time. So thank you.
So I'm not sure what direction the board wants to go here, but I'll just say that I'm in favor, as I was last year, I'm in favor of rolling that fee back from $950 to $250. As to making substantial changes in the hearings process at Lane County, I guess I would propose a work session on that so that the people who are as I am, in favor of streamlining that and maybe having the final decision be the board decision, because it has been, we've received the record from the hearings official, or the hearings official itself, himself, herself, makes the decision, or maybe there's a argument on the record in front of the board. But I guess I'll divide them into two things. One is, I really didn't think that was fair to raise those appeal fees, and the increase from the 950 to 250 did bother me. That's up to the board as to whether we're going to move in that direction or not. And secondly, this idea of a work session to make it clear what the appeals process is and hopefully try to find a way to cut the costs and increase the speed. Yes, sir.
I was actually looking forward to this on the agenda. I just wanted to learn. And I must say that on the basis of everything I've heard, I agree with both of your points, Chair. It's nice to be 100% with you. I honestly expected to hear a significant financial gain from the increase in fees that the board determined last year, only because it seemed to be something that could potentially eliminate citizen participation for some groups of people. And now that I'm hearing the cost benefit, it just doesn't seem that maximal at this point for me. So I'm just sharing that, and I'm also sharing that I agree if we could streamline the process, I would be all for that. And what I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner Wozovich, correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard you either speculating or predicting how LUBA would interpret local ordinance. And I wanted to ask County Council, do you have any experience or know of other counties where, in fact, that's correct? The local, whatever you call it, discretion or ordinance is overlooked if it's above and beyond or more restrictive than, well, you know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. If the county decides to, for example, be tighter in restricting development, tighter than the state statute requires, that would be county policy. And that would be the sort of policy that, if applied by the board in a quasi-judicial setting, would get deference at LUBA. That doesn't mean that LUBA, the Court of Appeals, is going to say, yeah, we think that's a dumb policy, we're going to reverse the county. It just means that they're going to interpret the language according to how they think it reads. It doesn't mean that they get to substitute their policy judgment for the board's policy judgment in adopting the legislation. It just goes to how do you interpret that, sort of the judging role of what do those words on the page mean. And if it's reasonable, the county's interpretation, and they agree with the legal interpretation, they will apply it, as did the county. If they think that the county's interpretation was strained and not reasonable, they'll disagree with it. That's all. But they don't substitute their policy judgment.
That was my question. Thank you. And one follow-up, if I may, and that is, were that to occur, would not this board have an opportunity to see if LUBA was interpreting our policy as we wanted it interpreted, and if in fact they were not, would we not have an opportunity to reinstate?
I think that if LUBA, Court of Appeals interpretation of a local ordinance ended up being inconsistent with what this board wanted in terms of policy, then yeah, you have your legislative role to come back and change things as
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I just wanted to give my head nod to the work session about the streamlining. I think elevating this from a financial perspective, which actually doesn't sound like it, sounds like it's $25,000 or less total for the year. Elevating the conversation to how we're actually dealing with the appeals process in general makes a lot more sense to me. And ultimately, that may change the allocation of fees in the long haul that we're concerned with, because we certainly want the department to be able to do the work and be funded for that work, but in the most efficient manner.
Yeah, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. Just go back to my point about time and fees. $700 when you multiply that out isn't a great deal of money in the grand scheme of things with 45 appeals or however many.
If I could just clarify, I actually misspoke. That was 45 total appeals for the year. This $950 appeal that we're talking about only applies to those elect not to hear appeals, and that's 15 for the year, so it's even fewer.
Even a tinier amount of money in the grand scheme of things, which pales in light of the time element that I was talking about, which if an appeal takes months or years to go through the process. And so, which means that if the fee is lowered to 250, we would presume that more people would not view that as a deterrent to them filing an appeal. So we'd expect more appeals based on Commissioner Sorensen's argument, which was agreed to by Commissioner Burney, that there'd be more appeals because it's less money to appeal. Otherwise, why not keep it at 750? I mean, the point is to make it easier to appeal, to reduce the cost, to make it easier to appeal, which means ultimately that is more appeals and more projects, more houses, more residences, more front doors, that the process is slowed down. And so I'm not saying that's good or bad. You know, I'm not making a value judgment on that, other than the fact that it does slow down the cost of the process of building a house. And if you jump up from 15 up to 30, then you've doubled the number of houses that have been slowed down in the county. That's my point on time. It's just a matter of time, money. $700 is nothing. You know, make it free, no cost for appeals. That's only, we'd only lose $250 more. Make them free. That's nothing. It's the time that's the problem. It's the delay in adding the residences. To me, that's the problem. Unless somebody can present me with a powerful argument that it's not causing a slowdown in building homes, then I say appeal every single home application inside the urban growth boundary and outside. But I'm afraid that nobody can present that argument. It slows down building homes.
So I'll just kind of try to bring this to a conclusion, and we'll have another round for everybody to talk. Last year the board voted to increase this fee from $250 to $950. I was a no vote. Board passed 4-1. I would like to do two things in this remaining time we have. One is I'd like to direct staff to bring back an order to lower it to $250. And secondly, I'd like to get a work session on the appeal process with the goal of trying to modernize, my word, the appeals process. And let's hear some comments on that or any other comments. Go ahead.
So I was going to use my time, one, to support your idea of a work session because, I know what I'm bringing in some of my knowledge from other aspects with respect to this Attorney General's, letter and some of those issues. Mr. Clark should be aware of them because it's the same department that he consults for. It's relative to building code officials and electrical inspection, but is really about hiring out of any discretionary authority, basically, and the contracting of that, and whether we have legal jurisdiction to do that under Oregon's Constitution, or delegation of that subjective decision-making process. So that's a key to this discussion about whether or not we can change that flow chart. And I want to give him time to research that and bring all that back. I'm more than happy to agree to the work session on streamlining because Commissioner Farr is correct. It's not just dollars, it's time. What's the average time it takes to get a LUBA hearing right now? What's it running?
Say the question again, from when to when?
How long does it take to get a LUBA hearing scheduled once we've made our final decision and notified LUBA that we want, that something's coming there for appeal?
Well, I think that, I think the statute says that LUBA is supposed to make its decision within 77 days of the record being filed. And then working forward from the county decision, there's 21 days to file notice of intent to appeal. Once that's filed, there's 21 days to file the record. That frequently gets extended because we can't meet that deadline typically. And so let's call it, twice that long. So you've got 77 days plus 45 days or something like that. So what's that, 120 days, 130 days?
We're running 4 to 6 months, somewhere in that range. Yeah. And depending on what LUBA says, it can continue the process on from there. Just when you think about, $700 difference and whether that's a barrier, I would say that the only thing it's really a barrier for is for those appeals that are purely based on, I'm going to keep running the clock on this and hope that that whoever wants to have this happen will walk away. And 4 to 6 months, of additional time for $700, for $250, it's a no-brainer. For $950, you got to think a little bit about that, because it's not just about that there's only 15 appeals, and maybe it might change it to be, we've already had 3 this year, and we're less than 2 months into the year. It's not really the total dollars and times 700. Every time there's an appeal not filed, there's something that's going, that is either approved or disapproved in his final decision, and people can move on, versus something that is extended into at least 6 more months of limbo, and we're going to spend at least $1,300 worth of staff time on that $250 appeal, which means they're not spending that $1,300 worth of staff time processing other permits, which we have become notorious for being one of the most difficult places to pull a building or zoning permit. Our reputation right now in the home builders community is not good. And I can look to my other rural commissioner to ask her where she hears a lot of her complaints, and she probably will agree with me that we do not have a great reputation there. So lowering this fee, I can't just give my head nod to give direction to staff to come back with a board order, because I think lowering this fee is just opening ourselves up to frivolous, continuous appeals that don't get us to a final decision, that cost us staff time, that are causing us to be slower on other processes. There is a trickle-down effect to it. And I don't think there's been a great change. I think 6 months worth of data is almost no data at all, particularly seen in the last 2 weeks. We've seen 3 elect to hears. It's not really a great set of data. I would ask that the board postpone a decision on the fee change at least till we've got a year's worth of data.
Okay, so let's go down the line here. Joe?
You're looking for head nods now?
I made a suggestion about where we could go to end this.
You've had over 3 that are okay with the work session, so I think
Okay.
that question's answered.
Okay. Anything more on the fee?
No.
Okay.
Now, even if there was a compromise, I know that there's a lot of back and forth between 250 and 950, and I do want to ensure that people have a way in which to voice their concerns if something comes up to the board. I would support some kind of compromise, even if it was at 500 or something in the middle until we have this work session, in which case it may not actually be an issue if we continue down that route. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Okay. Commissioner Farr?
I'm fine. Said everything I wanted to say about housing.
Okay, so,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I think most statements here are probably true. I absolutely believe there's a time value of money and a money value of time. And our intent should be to expedite new units for those in need. So I don't disagree with that. I also don't disagree. Sometimes you need enough data to determine if something works or not. And yet, I also, I don't know, I'll raise you the 500 and bring you down to 400. And I appreciate exactly where that's coming from. I don't think we're talking about enough money to create a barrier or not create a barrier. I think it's just a matter of access and citizen participation. And we can always revisit. I'm done.
Okay, so just so I'm interpreting this, I think there were at least 3 commissioners that wanted to have the work session on the appeals process. And I heard not 3 commissioners wanting to lower the fee. Is that a fair statement?
I don't think so.
Oh,
You heard him
If I
lower the
can-
fee, but not necessarily 250.
okay.
I think
I
that was
can weigh in
Can I make a
quickly,
motion?
just as item, this was a discussion item only. Of course, it didn't come to you as a motion or with an order to do anything. If you want to roll in discussions about what the appropriate fee ought to be into the work session, that might be appropriate. And I don't think that would take too long to get something back on the agenda.
Okay. All right, what is the timeline for that appeal discussion and possibly lowering the fee?
Did you want me to come back with the issue that Commissioner Bozovich raised about whether the board has the authority to delegate?
Yeah, definitely, because
Okay.
that'll be part of the,
Yeah, and just to cap on that, I'm aware that there's that issue out there with respect to the building commissioner function and whether that can be delegated. I've never heard it applied to the hearings official scenario, but I haven't looked closely at it. And also know that there's been a pretty hefty reaction to that DOJ decision, so there, whether you can legislate around it, I don't know if it's constitutional, you can't.
Okay.
But I can take a look at that and come back and.
all right, so
4 weeks.
you want to just leave it vague, that we'll bring it back when the, or do you want to get a date, or what do you want to say?
I'd like to take a look at our calendars. I think mid-March is probably doable, but I'd like to confirm and
Okay.
double check.
All right. I'll just note for everybody that March 12 is a scheduled board meeting, but we probably have a reduced schedule on that day because we have only 4 commissioners present, so we'll probably have a reduced board day on that day.
There'll be 5 present, 1 will be on the phone.
Okay. Very good. All right, so thank you very much. We will now move to item 12A. I'm sure Ms. Gaffney appreciates that we are getting to our item prior to 6:30 p.m. So it is item 12A. This is our work session on the Oregon Health Authority's procurement process for coordinated care organizations. Ms. Karen Gaffney is the director of the Lane County Department of Health and Human Services. And we are pleased to have Ms. Gaffney here to give us this presentation and help us with the work session.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
thank you. I'm going to declare a potential conflict of interest. My wife works for the, since before I was elected, has worked for Trillium Community Health Plans, which is currently our coordinated care organization. This is a non-action item, and so I'm going to stay for the discussion, but I will declare a potential conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you so much.
Chair Sorensen.
And may I just interject that it's difficult for the commissioners to keep track of whether there is or is not something that affects their disclosure of possible conflicts of interest. And so anytime that staff can help us with that, such as in this situation, we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely, and we will do our best to help support that. And thank you for taking the time this afternoon to shift gears a little bit from the public works space and talk about the health and human services world in our community. We have today a work session. There is no action pending at this point, but an opportunity really to talk about coordinated care organizations in our community at this particular time because the Oregon Health Authority is in the middle of their process of reprocurement. This is the first time that they've gone back out to bid to select coordinated care organizations for a community. And while the county doesn't have a formal role in that selection process, the role of CCOs in our community is significant for us as an organization and for the community that we serve. So I wanted an opportunity before it's perhaps people are too much in looking at specific applicants to step back a little bit, talk about the process and CCOs, and be sure and answer any questions you might have. So that's my intention for this time today. I do have some slides to give some background information, and then my hope is that we'll have enough time for discussion and to answer any questions you might have about CCOs and how Health and Human Services and the county overall is impacted by that work in the community. And I will do my best to stay away from acronyms as we move through this, but if I forget, please stop and ask me. We will be talking about CCOs, which are our coordinated care organizations, and they are selected by the Oregon Health Authority, which is the OHA. I know those two will come up as we move through this next half hour. The other thing I would say is we launch into this discussion. So coordinated care organizations are the primary mechanism by which the Oregon Health Plan is administered in Oregon. And for Lane County, since the Affordable Care Act rolled out in 2014 and expanded access, we have about 25% of people who live in Lane County who are on the Oregon Health Plan, and most of those people are members of our coordinated care organization. So it is increasingly impactful in terms of health outcomes and access to care in our community. So thank you for taking the time today. What is a CCO? This particular drawing is a colorful way to represent how the state thinks about the focus, which is the middle of, it looks like a flower to me, but the middle of that diagram, better health, better care, lower costs. That's the triple aim that we talk about in Health and Human Services a lot, and is really the goal of healthcare transformation in Oregon. It's often relatively simple to do one or two of those things at the same time. The real challenge is to do all three, to be able to improve health outcomes, provide high quality services, and contain costs. And CCOs are really designed to help Oregon transform healthcare and to do all three of those things. And a number of things set CCOs apart. The first is that they receive a global budget. So when CCOs were created in 2012, it pulled together money for dental care, oral health care, physical care, physical health care, and behavioral health, which is mental health and substance abuse services. So in prior forms of the Oregon Health Plan, those were administered by three separate entities, and CCOs brought all three of those things together into a single global budget and designated a CCO as responsible and accountable for all three of those. CCOs are grounded in local communities. They have governance in local communities, and that looks a little bit different in the now 15 different parts of Oregon where CCOs exist. But the model is absolutely that important decisions should be made at the local level. Local community partnerships are critical, so there's governance in local communities. CCOs are grounded on clear metrics, and really the OHA drives performance and accountability through specific outcome metrics and has devoted significant resources toward quality incentive payments to CCOs who are able to achieve those metrics. And then finally, there's a clear focus on primary care, prevention, and chronic conditions, knowing that, again, if we're trying to achieve that triple aim and ultimately improve health and decrease costs, communities need to get a handle on chronic conditions and invest more in prevention. So that's the larger definition of CCOs, and you can spin kind of around that circle for the particular elements that make up a CCO. Again, a focus on best practices, paying for outcomes, sustainable rate of growth. Some of you may remember that Governor Kitzhaber was in office when this idea was birthed in Oregon with the legislature, and part of our waiver with the federal government was to promise as a state to contain the growth of medical costs. So 3.4% is the maximum that Oregon has committed. That will be our maximum growth rate in Medicaid expenses, which is significantly lower than what other states are experiencing. Started to talk a little bit about the background. In 2011 and 2012, the Oregon legislature adopted the primary authorizing legislation around our CCO models, and in 2012, the Oregon Health Authority began its process of selecting CCOs in specific communities. The law said there has to be more than one in Oregon, but it didn't dictate how many there need to be. So at that point, it really was an open process for communities to apply to become CCOs. In Lane County, Trillium was selected as the CCO to serve Lane County. And as I mentioned at the beginning, prior to CCOs, there were 3 different accountable care organizations, really, who were managing Medicaid. There were, so the Lane County operated mental health organizations. In Lane County, it was called Lane Care. Some of you may remember Lane Care. And then we had fully capitated health plans that did the physical health benefit and dental care organizations. So in Trillium, as we brought together a community organization to be a CCO, we folded in Lane County in some specific ways, in risk sharing at that time, in governance, and I think I may have a slide later that talks about this, but in terms of governance for Trillium, from the beginning, there have been 3 seats on the board of directors that are held by county positions. The health officer, Pat Ludke, sits in one of those seats. Lisa Roth, who's our manager for Trillium Behavioral Health, and myself are on their board of directors. So there's a partnership around governance, behavioral health management, and as I said, we have a division of Health and Human Services that's called Trillium Behavioral Health. That's fully funded by Trillium. We hire staff, Lane County staff, to manage that benefit for substance abuse and mental health services. And then we have a partnership around prevention. In our community, from the very beginning of our CCO, the CCO has set aside $1 for every member every month, which, depending on the membership, now is about $1.5 million a year for primary prevention. And those services those funds are invested in services that are both approved by Trillium and approved by Lane County Public Health. And then finally, in clinical care, Lane County operates an FQHC. As you know, we have 6 sites of primary care as well as specialty behavioral health. And so our clients are largely Medicaid members, and we provide that clinical services. So that's been in place since August, and now in January, this is the first opportunity that the state of Oregon has opened up that reprocurement process for bidders. And again, it is an open process, and there are specific restrictions, and if you're interested in that, I'm happy to tell you who can apply, but it is pretty wide open. Coordinated care organizations have some requirements under the law to make sure, again, that they're grounded in local community. The first is that every CCO is required to have a community advisory council, and that's a consumer voice. At least 51% of CACs is how we refer to them, community advisory councils, have to be members of the Oregon Health Plan so that there's a clear consumer voice in decision makings. And the membership of those CACs, in addition to being appointed by the CCO, the statute actually requires that counties participate in approving the membership of those coordinated care or those community advisory councils. So it's a requirement for county involvement there. There's also a requirement in the law that local mental health authorities, and in our community, the board serves as our local mental health authority, and community mental health programs coordinate with their local CCO. Because behavioral health services are such an important part of what CCOs deliver, it's critical in communities throughout Oregon that there be coordination between the counties who provide crisis services, commitment services, a whole lot of important mental health services, to really coordinate those with CCOs. So the law requires that every CCO have an MOU with their county for those services. And then CCOs are required to have a community health improvement plan. And in Lane County, that has been a shared community health improvement plan since the beginning of Trillium as a CCO. So that same chip that you have approved is the same chip that Trillium uses. And then I would also say, I know there's been a lot of conversation in Lane County about what are the business structures for CCOs, and that really varies across the state. little more than half of the CCOs are private for-profit organizations, and the others are not-for-profit. So in Oregon, there isn't a specified business structure for the entity. Instead, it's more an accountability in the contracting process for all of the elements that I talked about in that community. Wanted to talk a little bit about frameworks for CCOs. And again, this is our vehicle in Oregon to transform how we deliver care, to ensure partnerships with members in their own health, to have a voice for providers in the community, and to build coalition. So Oregon has picked this as our vehicle for transforming healthcare. And I will tell you, in the last 5 years, we've received tremendous attention nationally for this particular model. And we've, while we may not have achieved everything yet that we hope to, the results really have been tremendous, and quality outcomes have improved and costs have been contained in Oregon. Second piece I would say is a real focus on bringing stakeholders together to solve problems, both through the community advisory councils that I talked about earlier, as well as the clinical advisory panels, who are made up of, as you might expect by the name, clinicians in the community. There really is this structure in a community then to engage people in larger problem-solving conversations. And so that's part of the CCO framework. The third piece is an opportunity for flexibility in how services are provided. Some of you may remember, as CCOs were being rolled out, Governor Kitzhaber was on the stump and talked a lot about air conditioners. So that's kind of the prime example for this hoped for flexibility, that you have a patient who's in the hospital, congestive heart failure, and that really what that person needs isn't to be in the hospital, but needs an air conditioner so that she can stay in her apartment. It's better for her, it contains costs. So that's kind of the example of flexibility for how services are provided. I would say we focused a little less maybe on air conditioners in our community, and more on some of the other service provision types in our community. We've talked about permanent supportive housing, for instance, as a crucial way to deliver services differently in our community. So CCOs are designed to take a Medicaid program that's governed at the federal level and really bring it down into local communities and provide some flexibility along with accountability for how that's delivered. And then finally, shared accountability for results. Clearly, the feds benefit if we're able to meet our goals around costs and quality, and the CCOs are designed so that local providers and communities benefit as well. So there's a shared accountability and benefit for achieving results. I'm almost done with the slides, and then we can talk. I do think it's important that the board have an opportunity to ask any questions about our particular relationship with our CCO. As I said, we've only had one, so I can speak to what that relationship has included. And this has been true for the whole 5+ years of the relationship. Talked about governance earlier. It was important to the county in establishing that relationship that the Board of Commissioners and your staff on your behalf have a clear voice in that governance piece, particularly around policy and systems issues. I often think about how hospitals can come and go and doctors can come and go from a community, but really the county as the local health authority is here to meet those needs of people who live in this community, and we're always going to be here. So we have an important role in setting policy and a voice in how to address system issues. Second piece was a structure for collaborative management of the behavioral health system, and I talked about that a little bit before. When we were first moving to CCOs, we talked a lot about how best to do that, and different communities have approached that question differently. In some communities, it was just a carve out a contract to the county to run the behavioral health system. In our community, we felt like the collaboration was an important piece. So bringing in the expertise of county mental health providers alongside those, the physical health provider system was important. So not just to create another silo, but to really look at integration. So for us, the way we manifested that was the creation of Trillium Behavioral Health as a unit within the county that operated those services and is part of the management team at Trillium. The third was collaboration on primary prevention, social determinants, and public health related issues. Again, for our stake as a local health authority in improving health in the community means that we're highly invested in those particular issues, and as a partner, developing Trillium and helping them understand the importance of making those investments. And then finally, the clear collaboration on that clinical level. I talked about how we provide safety net services to almost 30,000 people through our federally qualified health centers, and that relationship is important. Here's where we're at on the current calendar with the Oregon Health Authority. They have released their RFP on January 25th. Letters of intent were due last Friday, and when we were preparing this packet, we expected their marker on their calendar was to release the names of everyone who submitted LOIs by the 5th. They actually released that information yesterday, although they've given applicants 2 weeks to amend their letters of intent. So we won't know until April, when final applications are due, who will ultimately apply to serve Lane County, but we do know who has at least expressed some interest in Lane County at this point. And there are, as of yesterday, there were 4 letters of intent to serve Lane County. See if I didn't write them down, but one was Trillium, one is MODA, another was Pacific Source, and the 4th one was Umpqua Health Alliance. So again, those are non-binding letters of intent, but those are the 4 who expressed at least a preliminary interest in applying in Lane County. This last slide, I would just say, is a teaser for what's to come in the next 5 years for coordinated care organizations. The Oregon Health Policy Board has done a lot of work this last year in listening to communities about what's most important for Medicaid in this next period of time. And these 4 priorities were adopted by the Health Policy Board, and many of them have legislative and policy pieces attached that have been forwarded to the legislature at this time. You can expect to see an even larger focus on behavioral health, value and pay for performance as we continue to try and shift how care is paid for in communities across Oregon, focus on social determinants, and maintaining a sustainable level of cost growth. So those we'll be talking a lot more in the next few years. So thank you for your patience as I went through that overview of the process. I guess my question for you is, are there particular elements of that that you would like to know more about? Is there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much. This was really excellent. And for the public that follows our meetings, this is a great example of why we try to televise these meetings. Not that everybody's going to watch this meeting at 3:20 p.m. on the day they watch it, but it can be very useful to the public that wants to understand, well, what is the current update on the coordinated care process? So it's great. I do have a question for you, and that is, how voluminous are these letters of intent, and can we put them on our website, and are they public, and can we further educate the community about at least the status of the letters of intent?
Sure. The letters of intent themselves are actually pretty brief, and what we could do is post, probably most efficient would be to post a link from our website to the Oregon Health Authority site where they keep it updated. This, however, is my double-sided version of the RFP that was released for CCOs, so that is not a brief
It's probably on their website, though.
Yes,
Yeah,
it is
okay.
absolutely on the Oregon Health Authority's website.
Well, I think you got an excellent idea of maybe putting a link on our website so that if people want to know more about coordinated care organizations, that's a great place to look. Now, my second question is, when do you think the Board of Commissioners should, if at all, be involved with the Oregon Health Authority's decision about who to select?
Chair Sorensen, Commissioners, that's an interesting question. I know that AOC had submitted some comments to the Oregon Health Authority, and at least one of those was around clarifying a stronger role for counties in the selection. From what I can tell, they have not identified a particular requirement that OHA check in with boards of commissioners or that piece. What is required in the revised packet is that applicants for CCOs, and I actually printed that out, that there's an expanded role for counties and local agencies to increase county involvement in social determinants of health and health equity planning, and that they added a requirement to include counties, including local public health authorities and local mental health authorities, in community engagement plans and development of the community health needs assessment and the CHIP. Obviously, we've always done a shared CHIP, but I would expect that if organizations truly intend to develop applications to serve Lane County, then they will reach out to us to have that conversation.
Okay. Other questions, comments by commissioners?
So that list of letters of intent, are any of those groups nonprofit?
Yes, I couldn't tell you of the ones that, for Lane County in particular. I'm always confused. So Pacific Source is not a nonprofit, but I want to say they're a community benefit corporation. They're a different model, and I can't remember exactly what it is. And I'm not sure what the status of the Umpqua Health Alliance is, but I certainly can get an answer to that question. They all currently contract with the Oregon Health Authority, so I can find that out and email if you'd like.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments by commissioners? Okay, well, what's a good check-in for you and the board now into the future on this? When is there, like, people ask me, what about public involvement? I said, here's the cynical part. There's two types of public involvement: too early and too late. I want to hit the sweet spot of right before the public involvement. We're told public involvement's coming up. So when is that?
And Chair Sorensen, I think some of that may depend on what you would like to have an influence on. Certainly, if there are community meetings and events that any of the applicants are holding, I would absolutely notify you and invite you to those. If you have an interest in hearing more about this before applications are due, we can come back. We'll have a Board of Health probably this spring, right before applications are due, where we can give you an update. But as I said, there isn't action that would need to come to the board because it really is the health authority that will be doing the selection.
Okay. Is there any kind of coalition of health directors or people involved with counties, AOC, somebody who's like coordinating the county role in this process?
I would say that lands in a couple of places. Certainly, the Human Services Subcommittee of AOC is one place where they've talked about CCOs a lot. In terms of associations, I would say both the Conference of Local Health Officials and the Association of Community Mental Health Directors are highly interested in this. And so from a staff level, both of those associations have been tracking on it pretty closely.
Okay. Okay, Commissioner Bernie?
So we as a county are not submitting an application, but 4 entities that you're coordinating with are?
The county is not submitting an application, it's true. The requirements to be a CCO really have pretty intensive insurance plan requirements, and I would say we don't have the capacity in our department right now to deliver on those services to actually be the CCO. I think there are lots of parts of the CCO that we're very good at and that we need to be engaged in. But in terms of being the insurance plan, we don't really have that infrastructure to apply. And yes, we absolutely, with whoever is selected to be the CCO, I would absolutely expect and hope that we'll have a close relationship with that entity.
Do we, I'm saying we, I know it's you, do we have a close relationship with all entities to the point where we're impacting the design that they are proposing so that it's consistent with where you want to see it go?
Chair Sorensen, Commissioner Burney, that's a good question. Until yesterday, we didn't know who might be interested in applying in Lane County. So certainly one of the conversations I had with staff this morning is the need to at least reach out to those organizations and find out if they, there's a strategic piece that might be a placeholder and they're trying to decide where they're going to apply. But if anyone is seriously considering an application in Lane County, I would absolutely invite them to and hope that they would engage us in that design work.
Okay. Anything further? Okay, well, thank you very much, Ms. Gaffney, for your always on top of it presentations, including this one. And we'll see you back here at least minimum when we have the Board of Health in the spring. Thank you. Okay, so let's go back to our review of our agenda. Item 1, adjustments to agenda. We are done with public comment. We had a short round on the commissioner response to public comment. We do not have any emergency business. Approve the consent calendar. Have not had the county council announcements, which we could do upstairs prior to our executive session. We've done all of county administration, number 7. We have not done 8, commissioners' business. We can continue executive session. We have a brief other business item. And other than that, we've done everything else. So I would propose that we march down the agenda on the things we haven't finished and then recess to go upstairs, have our county administration announcements, then go into executive session for such time as the board wants, and then we would be done. So my goal is right now to go through everything where we're going to have some follow-up, and then that way we can cut our county administrator loose and finish our executive session. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I already did my announcements, but
Yeah.
and oftentimes county council, if he's not here, he doesn't have announcements.
Well, we'll just give him a second upstairs. Okay, so now, by my count, we are now going to 8A, Commissioner's Business, and that would be any announcements by commissioners. Are there any announcements? No. Yes, Commissioner Farr.
Just a clarification, at the start of the meeting, during adjustments to the agenda, I suggested that I was going to be making a motion to reconsider under item 15, other business.
Yeah, okay, other business, right,
At the very end of the meeting.
right, okay, very good. Do you want that after the executive session, or do you want that before we?
After is fine, yeah.
Oh, after.
We want to do it before.
Oh, we can.
Yeah,
we can do it
my goal
before.
was to wrap up as much as we could so we can cut.
Also,
county
we can cut Metro loose.
Yeah, exactly. Also to cut Metro loose. Okay, so any other announcements? Okay, let's go to 8B, agenda team requests. Are there any agenda team requests? I had 2. One was I commented that I'd like to see LRAPA hold a public hearing outside of the context of their meeting room, maybe as a joint board meeting. Could you comment on that, either of you? Well, I've been on LRAPA but many years ago. Could either of you comment on that?
I guess my comment on that would be, what if we could find out from LRAPA what the current process for those 2 permit renewals is, and is there going to be a hearing anyway?
Okay.
Do we need to make a request for a hearing, or are they already planning on one?
I'm sure they're planning to have a hearing, yeah.
Yeah.
As the new board designee onto LRAPA, I will communicate the will of the board.
Okay. Well, how about this as a request? I think Commissioner Bozovich is correct. We should just ask LRAPA to let us know whether or not there is a hearing and when it is, and you can find that out.
Yeah, I know for a fact there will be, because they reviewed that with me yesterday. So I will find out when it is, the parameters around it, and see if this board wants to participate in that.
Yeah, and just pose the idea, because I don't think we have agreement that we do want to do it, but that might be something we would be considering doing. So.
I will find out, sir.
Very good. Excellent. And then my second one was Ms. Hecht wrote a letter to the sheriff about the ICE and sheriff, and I was wondering if the board would be willing to have us write a letter to the sheriff and ask to see the response to that letter. In other words, the letter came from Ms. Hecht to the sheriff. What response was given? Could we get a copy of that? Or will there be a response? Something like that. So if there are 3 commissioners that want to do that, then we'll ask staff to draft a polite letter asking for the response from the sheriff about the letter that Ms. Hecht wrote.
You want that do you want that approved by the board or just signed by the chair?
I think maybe it should be approved on the consent calendar.
And it just would be a very basic letter that says, we understand there was this letter. Would you please tell us what this is all about?
Yeah, that'd be good. And any response that they've given to the letter.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't want to put that as an agenda request until we have 3 commissioners that agree with that. So could I see some head nods on whether to request that letter? Yes?
Go the other direction.
Okay.
That letter would be a matter of public record.
Yes, it would be.
So I don't know why we need to request it. I kind of feel like, the sheriff is an independent elected official and has to answer to the people. I don't know if it's our place to be, demanding responses and
I definitely would not want the word demand used.
Yeah, but I'm a little uncomfortable with us stepping into this discussion. One, our understanding of the legal, like I mentioned, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to try and interpret Oregon statute or federal code around that particular issue. But whatever response to Ms. Hecht, unless it's from his attorney, is a matter of public record. And I think, that will be public record at the time. And I don't know if we need to be involved in making that request. I want to maintain our relationship with the sheriff as an independent elected department head and an official, and also the highest law enforcement officer in this county.
I would like to give Sheriff Trapp an opportunity to respond before we even make such a request. I'd like to give him a little time, and if this is something where time is lagging, the next time that we assemble and there has been no response, then that would make sense to me. But otherwise, it almost becomes sort of a statement as opposed to just doing business, and that would be my prerogative.
Okay, so I don't see 3 head nods for that, so let's drop that. We'll wait till we see any response, if at all.
We can always bring it up.
We can always bring it up, always. Okay, we have 3 items of other business. Let's see, one is Commissioner Buck and I reviewed with the agenda team the idea of having a public comment or expanded public comment, and we wanted to get some direction from the board on having a 1 p.m. public comment for next week's board meeting. That'd be Tuesday, the 12th, at 1 p.m. It'd be put on our agenda for Thursday, when the agenda goes out. And the idea would be to give people an opportunity who had not presented public comment in the morning, but who wish to present public comment at 1 p.m. ahead of our 1:30 public hearings, and people coming in for the 1:30 public hearings would not be allowed to come at public comment for one, and on their public hearing matter. But the idea would be to try that. So I'm sure Commissioner Buck could further explain this.
Yeah, this came up, I think, because we were struggling with maybe perhaps an evening meeting and making it relevant for an upcoming meeting or the cost of doing that. And so I just put out there, maybe people can take a little lunchtime to come talk to us if they can't at 9. And perhaps if we can't make an evening one work in anyway, this might be a good alternative. And it doesn't have to be every meeting, but we can try it out. If it doesn't work for next week on the 12th, it looked like March the 12th had some time to perhaps do that. It was just a compromised idea.
And I remember now why we wanted to bring it up today is that if commissioners had appointments for next Tuesday, we wouldn't want to break into that, because my goal had been to give us an hour and a half at lunch, and that this is kind of modifying that.
I typically schedule meetings from noon to 1:30, including executive committee meetings of Human Services Commission.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yep.
So I view that 90 minutes as a time to, in the middle of the day, to conduct other business.
Okay. So would the board, I'm kind of hearing maybe some people wanted to try it out, but I also don't want to cut into the 90 minutes unless there's board direction the other way. So I kind of side with you on this, because having the opportunity to have meetings and lunch meetings between 12 and 1:30 is good. Now, I realize that differs from the idea that, well, maybe try early afternoon public comment. So would you rather go with the evening? Let me ask you that.
My experience is that evening, with the city of Eugene, evening had a pretty robust attendance. Once people knew that we had the meetings, but it also was always in conjunction with another meeting. It was never just a public comment session.
So maybe that'll be our next direction, unless,
Well, question?
yeah, go ahead.
1:30 would not do the trick?
Well, 1:30, we have public hearings, almost always scheduled at 1:30.
Okay.
That's the problem with 1:30, yes.
So, and this is partly a question for Commissioner Farr. If it's, once a month, where it's not every meeting where we're coming in at 1, I don't see an issue with that as long as we know enough in advance that we can make sure we don't schedule a lunchtime meeting that's going to go past 1 o'clock.
I'm usually predictable on it. I don't, it's not something that I say, oh, in 10 minutes I'm going to decide to have a meeting.
Yeah. So as long as we know far enough in advance, and for next week on February 12th, I don't have any lunch meetings planned. So if we wanted to do a public comment at 1 o'clock next week as a test case, I'm fine with that. I think it's a good opportunity, because it is, where people could, rebuild their lunch hour a little bit late or something like that, enough time to get here, that we're going to stop public comment pretty hard. We have to stop pretty hard at 1:30, so we're not going to be able to, if there's 30 people lined up, we're either going to have to limit it to a minute or 40 seconds or something like that. But at least, as a test case for next week, I'm good with next week. And as long as it's something where we can kind of get a schedule out in advance, so that, Commissioner Farr doesn't, double schedule himself. I think 1 o'clock might be a good test thing. If it doesn't work, we can look at the evenings.
Yep.
I absolutely agree with Commissioner Bozievich, as long as we do it at a time that works for Commissioner Farr.
Okay, so will next Tuesday work?
Yes,
not?
next Tuesday would work,
Okay,
definitely.
let's just do it then, one time, at this point, 1 p.m. next Tuesday, that's February the 12th. And we'll set that right now on our agenda. We did also discuss, well, what if we don't have anybody answer? We will start in with the agenda that we hadn't finished previously and just use that time as productively as possible before the 1:30 meeting. So Commissioners, I'll just give you early warning that we are starting the meeting at 9 o'clock. We will go till noon. We will cut off at noon, giving people 1 hour off. And then at 1 p.m., we'll have our public comment. And if there's no public comment, we'll just resume piling through our regular agenda. So now let's go to what I will call 10B, which is the voter pamphlet direction. Commissioner Farr, we were pretty evenly divided around here about the voter pamphlet, voter information, and you wanted to be heard on this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reason I'm bringing this up is because, Ms. Betchart had jury duty that day and didn't really have an opportunity to testify regarding the impact on staff. And upon reviewing a little bit further, after we made it wasn't a board order, it wasn't a formal vote, we just made kind of a head nod decision, I believe is what it was, to go with the voters pamphlet as opposed to an information brochure. Did you make a motion? I'm not finding the motion. Did you sign a motion? Did you sign an order on that, Commissioner Sorensen, last week?
I believe that she made a motion, and I believe it passed, but there was not a board order on it. That might.
I believe there was a motion.
Okay. Then I need a little bit of guidance. I would like to make a motion to reconsider, but since there's no order number on the motion, so as just a general, a motion to reconsider the decision that we made on a 3-2 decision to use a voter's pamphlet instead of a information brochure for the.
Oh, wow.
Here comes
I'm hearing some
our
thundering
motion police
hooves
right now,
coming
so
down here.
I believe we're going to understand whether there's a motion or
I
not.
think we're going to get some info here.
If you all look at your minutes that you approved today,
3 minutes, okay.
you'll see under item from the 29th, board order number 3, so it was 19-1-29-3. During that discussion, you guys made a bunch of other motions as well. You'll see the motion listed in the comments on that item. There was no board order brought to the board, but there was in fact motions and seconds and a vote recorded for the voters pamphlet.
And as we know, the Roberts Rules of Order apply, except when they don't. And so, as far as I'm concerned, we don't have to have a lot of additional process on this. If what you're asking to do is to revisit this, then I would just say we could either do it under the authority of other business right now, or we can take it as a board assignment to get it in front of the board as soon as possible with the kind of notice that we normally put on our meetings, whichever you'd like to suggest.
Well, I'd like to get closure on it today if we possibly could.
I think that personally, I favor us using the title other business for other business that comes up. And normally, of course, we have a very defined agenda process, but the reason we have other business on there is precisely to take care of things where commissioners want something done. And I'm okay with that, but I just wanted to raise that other people may well want to use this opportunity in the future to put other business on the board agenda.
I understand that, and at the start of the meeting, I had a choice between doing it with the commissioner business or other business.
Yeah.
I chose other business, and hearing no recommendations to the contrary or the alternative, then I stuck with other business on this particular item.
So do you want to
Again, either
reverse
way.
that decision and have another vote?
Yeah, if it's a matter is to reconsider, then we'd vote on a matter to reconsider the decision, and then we'd have a vote on the decision.
Okay, let's do that so that we are very clear with staff, because we've got some really important meetings coming up where this is a big factor in it. So why don't you go ahead and make a
I move to
motion?
reconsider the motion of the January 29th board meeting to direct staff to prepare a voters pamphlet for the May midterm election.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Farr, seconded by Commissioner Bozovich to reconsider the motion made at a previous meeting wherein the board directed there be a voter pamphlet.
And this is just a motion to reconsider. If this passes, then we discuss the motion, the reconsidered motion.
Okay, is there further discussion on the motion to reconsider? Like I said, I think we ought to have a voter's pamphlet, so I'm going to vote no. Any other questions, comments?
I'll just restate and add a little bit to why I did this. Because I'm going to use a quote from last week. I'm not, this isn't my quote, as somebody else said this, I don't like to place undue burden on staff. And I believe that preparing a voters pamphlet for a midterm election would place undue burden on staff at a time when they have plenty of burden preparing the ballot itself. Consequently, it would basically be a cost savings which isn't the most important element, but it is an element of why I'm making this decision. More significantly is the burden on staff. So I believe that by preparing a brochure, it would take staff far less time to do so, and we would get an equal amount of information, potentially even more information to the public through a brochure as opposed to a voters pamphlet.
Okay, further comments? Okay, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor of reconsidering previous decision, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no.
No.
Motion carries 3-2. Those voting no are Commissioner Buck and Commissioner Sorensen.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
I'll call the question.
Okay, so the question's been called, so let's go to a vote. All those in favor of the motion,
To call the question.
call the question and close debate, cut off debate. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. No.
Wait, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Yeah.
I do apologize.
Yeah.
Are we voting now on not talking about?
Yes.
Just going directly to the vote, yeah.
On the vote we had last week?
Yes.
Okay, I would like to say something now,
Okay.
because this hit me off guard, but
Okay, so,
I will withdraw the motion to call the question.
okay, so let's just say we're not going to have a motion to call a question. So now we're debating the main motion.
I apologize.
Okay, okay.
I sense the frustration.
Yeah.
I did not expect this, so I just want to reiterate that I am going to vote the way I voted last time, but I just want to reiterate, this is not in any way, shape, or form limiting democracy or citizen input or reaching out to the public. This, to me, was just a logistical consideration. I just want to state that for the record.
Anything further? I'll just say that, the main issue for me is whether the county is going to issue a voter's pamphlet or not. And a voter's pamphlet doesn't just cover things that a government like Lane County government wants the public to have information on. It covers all matters that voters in the whole county are going to be voting on. And the state statute gives counties the authority to have these voter's pamphlet. Many of the people that are involved with the various districts and various offices, they feel that the county never puts out a county's voters pamphlet. I have often said, well, that's because if the county doesn't have anything on the measure, it's going to cost a lot of money. Well, we have something on the voters pamphlet, and that's going to spread the cost to the various jurisdictions. So that's why I feel like this transcends just Lane County's need to get information out. Okay, so we're ready to vote on the main motion. Any other comments?
And a clarification, the motion is to prepare a voters pamphlet and as opposed to the previous motion, which was to prepare a voters brochure and not a voters
The
pamphlet.
motion under reconsideration is to prepare a voter's pamphlet. That was.
That was the motion.
I'm one step
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is the motion to prepare a voter's pamphlet, which we're now reconsidering. So all those in favor of directing staff for a voter's pamphlet, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no.
No.
No. And so the 3 noes are Commissioners Bozovich, Commissioner Burney, Commissioner Farr, and the motion fails. So at this point, we're not preparing either.
So,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that we direct staff to prepare a informational brochure, informational pamphlet, I guess is the correct term. Is that informational brochure?
I actually think it's brochures.
Informational brochure for the May 21st election relative to the courthouse bond.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. So it's been moved by Commissioner Bozovich, second by Commissioner Burney, to prepare a voter brochure for the upcoming election, if we approve that for the election. Further discussion? Yes.
Although I'd much prefer a voter's pamphlet, I want something rather than nothing out there regarding the measure, so I'm supportive.
Very good. Thanks for that comment. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries 5-0. So that gives additional guidance for the staff on upcoming thing. Thank you very much. Okay, we are now ready to go to a review of assignments, item 13. And Mr. Mokrahysky, I'll turn to you for your review.
Mr. Chair, I had 3 items. The first was the request to have a work session regarding streamlining the appeal process. You worded it slightly different, but those are the notes that I took. A work session regarding the appeal process, potentially sometime in March, to be coordinated with staff schedules. I apologize, I missed the LRAPA. I heard potentially an assignment related to LRAPA, but I didn't hear exactly what it was.
I guess we'll ask Commissioner Burney to report back from his meeting with LRAPA, and I guess the assignment will be work with Commissioner Burney to determine when LRAPA is having their public hearings and determine the pros and cons of the Board of Commissioners conducting a public hearing.
Okay. The third assignment is to the vote you just took on the voter information brochure, and so we'll put that on the assignment list as well.
Okay, very good. Any other corrections or additions to the administrator's review of assignments?
The only,
Yeah,
on
go
the
ahead.
assignment relative to the appeals process, that also included a discussion of change in fee.
It did, right,
Yeah,
correct.
I just want to make sure we capture that, because I think that was kind of part of the promise. Was to
Yeah, I
make
think
sure
our
we
LMD
discuss that.
staff got that right.
Okay.
Okay. And now, I think we are ready to go upstairs and go to the Commissioners' Conference Room. At that time, then, I will read us into executive session, and we'll hear the county council's announcements. We will get on the record our reason for going into executive session. My hope is it will continue in our executive session until a reasonable time, meaning that the commissioners can
Want to read us
state.
in now?
Pardon me?
So do you want to read us into exec session now?
No, because we got to get the announcements if he has any.
I don't think he does, but.
Yeah.
okay.
I've been assigned to the LTD Strategic Planning Board, and that begins at 5 o'clock this evening.
Okay, Very good. So we'll go upstairs and we'll do what we can. We'll confer with council about the remainder of the schedule. So at this time, we are in recess, and we're in recess. We'll be going back to the Board of Commissioners conference room in about 5 minutes. So let's convene at approximately 4 o'clock in the Commissioner conference room. public session. Okay, we are in our public session, and I wanted to do two things. One is invite our county council to present any county council announcements. Do you have any announcements?
I don't have any announcements, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We are now going to go to our executive session, item 9, and our notice that we give to the public is that the Board of Commissioners will now meet in executive session to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation to be likely to be filed. This executive session is pursuant to ORS 192.660-2H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed above. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any deliberations during the executive sessions except to state the general nature of the subject of the session as previously announced. No decision will be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out into public session should the need arise. And I don't believe the need will arise, but we are reserving that. And so at this time, we are in executive session. Thank you.